Welcome to this episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Aric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a ton of kids.
We have 6 kids total. He has 3 and I have 3.
My name's Hallie and I love riding horses.
I'm Lexi and I love agriculture.
My name's Carter and I love eating.
My name's Chase and I love lifting weights.
My name's Summer and I love spending my parents' money.
I'm Dane and I love baseball.
Our show is about our blended, blessed, and always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we are in, that by sharing our story, all the fun and all the mess, the challenges we are experiencing, it will give you some inspirations, laughs, and community, knowing you are not alone in this mess.
We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's dive in.
This episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess is sponsored by the children's book Feathers Matter. As our kids grow up, they face challenges in their life, and knowing their self-worth and their value is crucial to face the headwinds. Purchase this beautiful story to read to your kids and grandkids and start the conversation with them at a young age. They are worthy, they matter, and their feathers matter. You can find the link to order on our Blended, Blessed, alwaysamess.com page. Mention code #blessed for an autographed copy. Welcome to this week's episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess, where this week Angie and I are super excited because we don't just have one guest joining us, we have 2 guests, which is pretty rare. But about a month ago, I stumbled on a podcast called The Game Plan Show. And I stumbled on it because I was at a conference here in Columbia called the Main Street Summit. And I always look for the seminars that I can relate to. And one of the guys talking that day was Trevor Rosenthal, who for a long time held the saves lead for the St. Louis Cardinals till just this past year. And I'm a diehard Cardinals fan, as anybody knows. And so I was in that seminar. And getting there, he starts talking about this new podcast that he's doing with his friend Jason. And so looking into that, I mean, they're really doing a lot of work to help kids, especially in their formative years, to come up with a game plan on how to win the mental game, because it is so critical. And so, guys, if you just want to both take a second and introduce yourselves, tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves and your podcast, and we'll dive into trying to help kids the best way we can today.
Thank you, Aric and Angie, for having us on. It was great to meet you. And Aric and I had a good amount of time to spend talking and getting to know each other. And I think we were passionate about a lot of the same things. Obviously, sports. We had a good conversation about the local sports teams and the St. Louis Cardinals and my experience there, which kind of led us into the conversation of, well, what the heck is Trevor Rosenthal doing in Columbia, Missouri at a business conference? And what's going on in life? What's going on with Trevor? And so we started to talk about one of the things that I'm passionate about, which is sports and giving back my experience specifically into the youth sports community and trying to help parents and coaches get a proper and holistic view of how to face the opportunity. We call it an opportunity in youth sports and how to make the most of it. I was obviously very fortunate to have a youth sports career that led to a collegiate career, that led to a professional sports career. And throughout that experience, I gained a lot of knowledge and wisdom as it pertains to being excellent. And one of the challenges that's come to my attention, and give a little shout out here to my co-host Jason Holzer, and working with Jason, this challenge or this problem that we're seeing in our society is that our perspective on youth sports has gotten skewed to some extent. So trying to get the focus back to where it needs to be, and looking at youth sports as a venue to develop the next generation of people, and not just develop these people and these young kids into adults to be successful in sports, but to be successful in all areas of life. And to sum that up, it really boils down to character. What are the character traits that you can teach and evolve through the sports venues that will lead into other areas of life? And so, through the Game Plan Show, we have a lot of these conversations. Jason and I, we usually have a guest come on, like you guys are today, have a guest come on the show who is an expert in their field, whether it be psychology, former, current athletes, or even boiling it down to nutrition and finance. So kind of a big breadth of wisdom that we like to share and topics that we like to cover. But that's what we've been doing, man. And it sounds like Aric, you and Angie are doing something very similar in the topics that you guys talk about with your show.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair because, as I mentioned to you, we met in Columbia. Like, the podcast started out as we blended our family, and that's challenging, right? You see more and more families blend. So how do you provide a great home environment for these kids? And then when we lost our oldest, Angie's firstborn, Hallie, almost 2 years ago now, that's just turned everything into a really big ball of no one knows what to do, right? Because now there's this element of grief involved, and you're still raising teenagers. And how do you raise these teenagers through a grief process? And so then as you and I started to talk, and I started doing research on your guys' show, and realized your co-host Jason had also been through a massive amount of loss at a young age in his life, I was just like, man, this podcast makes sense for us to have on. And so, Jason, if you just kind of tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with wanting to help folks, kids at a young age.
Yeah, I growing up in Jeff City, or Taos, Missouri, I had a love for Cardinals baseball, equally, Aric, as you. And I was a kid that was like, I knew all the stats. I wanted to play catch like all the time. Like I always had a ball in my hand. And, growing up, like it was something I loved to do and I was really excelling at. And ironically, like, I had a dream of what Trevor actually made a reality. But I didn't have the mental skill set or even the things that I felt like I needed to really go that far. And in fact, I stopped playing sports in high school. And in high school, I went through a significant event where I lost my dad to suicide. He took his own life. And that was 2003. And as a 17-year-old in 2003, there were no resources on how to handle grief, how to even have the proper support to help you get through something as, hey, my dad's here one day and he's gone the next. Like, and no matter what, it's hard. Whether you lose a parent, whether you lose a child, whoever it is in your life, whether it's your grandparent who, had a long, long life and they lived a great life, it's still challenging and it's still hard to let people go that you really care about, who are really influential. Because my dad was somebody that was my first coach. He was married to my mom and together with my mom for over 20 years. Like he was a great, great dad, right? So through that journey and through all that, I was like, I want to do something to help me through this. And luckily, I focused on my faith and I focused on like, I just one day I said, hey, bring the people in my life that I need to help me get through this situation. And it was a coach that was in Young Life. It was a mentor in college. It was, a mentor after college. It was another basketball coach that I looked up to as I went into coaching, as I went into education. And all of a sudden, like at the right time, all these people kept coming into my life to help me through my toughest times. Now, it wasn't always easy. Like there were challenges. There were things that I was struggling with, and I still work through today, 21 years later after my dad has passed, right? So grief is not something that you ever necessarily get over. It's something that you learn to accept and work through, and you got to find your new normal and help. Like, how do I take this burden and turn it into a blessing?
You don't know anything about that, do you, Ange?
I call that painful beauty. So same thing. Like, how do you take this gut-wrenching pain that we all will feel at some point in our life and turn it into something beautiful? And that is a long journey to get there for sure. But I think that's really the only choice that we have in life. How do you take the things that have happened to you and turn it into something good? It's hard. It's hard to do.
Well, and to your point too, like, something that I've done is, what were my best qualities? What were the best qualities of people that I have lost? I lost an uncle that was there for me, that was, helped me through my hardest time. And then my dad, my grandparent, I've lost both my grandparents. And it's like, what were their best qualities and how do I take those character qualities and infuse them into my life to help remember them and pass their legacy on, if you will, by the best parts of them. And I think that's one way it's helped me is like, okay, there's still a part of me, even though they're not physically here.
Yeah, it's a great way to honor them and also keep their memory alive in a lot of aspects of taking those core components of who they are and putting that back out into the world. We are a lot alike, Jason.
Both of you, so Cole, well, yeah, right out of that Cole County area, you guys are.
Yeah, must be the roots.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take then and just dive into that a little bit more, Jason, because you're obviously 17 when you lose your father. I was 27 when my dad died of a heart attack, and I thought that was bad. My baby sister was 17 when our dad died, and so I had to kind of step into a fathering role for her. And even though I had a 4 and a 1-year-old at the time, I wasn't prepared to start parenting a teenager, I probably made a lot of mistakes in trying to help raise my sister in that regard. You mentioned that you had some people step into your life, coaches and things like that. Can you give me an example of like one or two of those people and something that they did that you're extremely grateful for that you're using today?
Yeah, I mean, one of those guys it's Russellville's head football coach, Tim Rulo. He was a young life leader at the time. He was a college student at Mizzou. And the thing that he did was he was just made sure that I had somebody there for him. Like, he didn't try to fix anything. He didn't give me suggestions. Like, he couldn't relate to the things that I was going through. Even my uncles too. Like, they just made sure I had somewhere to go. Whether it was just, hey, let's go watch a ball game. Hey, let's go do some of the things that you really enjoy doing. Like, they didn't try to raise me. They didn't try to they gave me advice if I asked for it, but they never stepped in and said, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, right? It was really their presence. It was really their availability was their biggest, asset, if you will, to help me realize that, hey, you know what? Like, yes, this happened. And yes, you have to face this, but you don't have to face it alone. We're here for you. And this is how we're going to get through this together, right? It made me feel like I wasn't trying to just figure it out all by myself.
Trevor, what's something in your life that you have gone through, maybe personally or professionally, that's been incredibly challenging, where somebody stepped up for you and showed up in a way that you didn't expect?
Yeah, man, I feel like to answer that question, it's like I'm really kind of going through it right now, especially on the professional side. I mean, you brought up grandparents and loss of loved ones. Well, like, that's on the horizon for me. My grandparents are getting older. And so it's like there's a lot of things in my life that are definitely going on. But from a professional standpoint in baseball, over the last few years, having multiple injuries and really having a career that has had some ups and downs, but mostly a lot of highs, being in the professional baseball world. And recognize Trevor Rosenthal, like you mentioned, the saves leader for the St. Louis Cardinals. I mean, I experienced a lot of really great things, and for that to all kind of come to an end or close to coming to an end before I had anticipated it. I mean, I'm in the middle of that season right now, and it's a very interesting time to go through. And as you process and reflect, and to your point of some people that have helped out, I have a group of friends, a close group of former teammates that we've been meeting together, doing a Bible study weekly. And I mean, I just think of that, like, just think of those guys opening up. And these are all guys, names. Some of them are names that will be in the Hall of Fame. Others are names that had great careers, but maybe won't be talked about as much as others. But for each one of them and sharing their experience, they all had this same feeling. I remember on our conversation this week, one of the guys said it took him 9 years to get over the baseball player identity that he had into kind of like his new identity. And I just thought, I'm like, well, I might have a long ways to go. Geez, 9 years is a long time. But I think I'm just thankful for that and for those guys opening up, because on the surface, and I'm sure for anybody that's not familiar with professional athletes or professional sports or any sort of like celebrity type figure, I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems pretty glamorous, and it seems like what could be going on in their life that is relatable to mine, or what challenges could they possibly be facing. And I can assure you, maybe the challenges are different, but there are certainly a lot of challenges that come along with the uniqueness of being in the limelight and having a lifestyle that's on a public platform. So yeah, no, hopefully that answers your question, but to some extent, I feel I'm in a season of transition and in a season of figuring things out.
Just listening to you talk too about your journey, like, do you guys think like the hardest thing to learn that alters how you think about life is recognizing that you're not in control? Like, I think for me, that has been one of the hardest things to grasp when I thought I was going to have this life and these kids were all going to grow old and, everything was great, how our families came together. And then you have this pivotal moment in your life that it forever changes, and plug in whatever that moment is, right? It could be loss. It could be career change. It could be health issues, whatever that is. It's this recognition and acceptance of like, we're actually not in control. And I think that's what's really hard for people to process and then think, oh, now what do I do? Right? Because you had this like almost this reckoning moment of like, oh my gosh, life is not what I thought it was going to be. How do I go forward? And I think that's the the mindset that shifts and that people have to kind of figure out how do they get their mind right and be able to move forward.
Well, Angie, in my book, the second part of it is how to move forward after being left behind. And I think, and Trevor, this is a very common thing to say in sports. So it's control what you can control, right? I can't control whether my 8 or 5-year-old likes what I'm going to feed him for dinner, but I can't control that I'm going to provide for him, right? I can't control my dad passing away because of the things he was struggling with. But what I can do is I can control my own healing process. I can make the choice to be the best version of my own self, regardless of what is happening externally. Like, I think there comes a point where you have to take control of what are the things that I can control. I can control taking care of my mind. I can control taking care of myself. I can control my thoughts. I can control the words that I speak. And I can train myself. I can coach myself up on these things by reading, studying, working on who I am, having a growth mindset. And at the end of the day, like, that's where faith comes in. Like, I have no control over this, but I trust that things eventually get better. Like, there's a great saying that, the best parts always come right after the worst parts. And if you look at nature, like in the morning, it always gets the darkest before the sun comes up. So like just being able to believe that the sun is going to come up even in the darkest moments will kind of help you get through that. And another thing I like to say too a lot of times is like the light shines brightest in the darkest moments, right? So if you're in a dark room and you put a flashlight on, boom, you can light up. So I've always tried to be like, I've been in a dark place, but how do you become a light in that dark place to kind of help evaporate some of that darkness that's around it? So, I don't know if that answers your question at all, but I think it goes back to just being able to control what you have the ability to control.
I love that. I know when Trevor was talking at the Main Street Summit in Columbia last week, he was talking about the mental aspect of things. And then we started talking more and learning about your podcast. So how then, first of all, did you guys become friends, get to know each other, and decide, hey, we should do a podcast on this mental topic? And then let's dive into some things that you're teaching kids about how to turn on that mental game that is so important.
Yeah. So kind of how we formed our relationship. I don't remember exactly how it was brought to my attention, but through social media, through X, I saw something that Jason had been posting about youth sports and keeping a proper perspective. And so I just kind of reached out. I believe it was me who initiated the conversation and just said, hey man, I like what you're doing. If there's anything I can ever do to help out, I'd be more than happy to. And Jason, being the great communicator that he is, he got right back to me, and we quickly started just kind of keeping in touch and learning more about what each other was going through. And, one thing that I've learned through some great entrepreneurs and just great people, and Jason being one of them, is just the willingness to provide value. And that's how our relationship kind of got kicked off. Is I was interested in helping Jason, but I quickly found myself on the receiving end of Jason providing me value. And that's kind of how this whole thing has come to fruition. And Jason just continuing to pour into me. And then as I've taken an interest to what Jason has going on. So Jason has a business called 4D Leaders, and I highly encourage anybody to check out 4dleaders.com. But what 4D Leaders does is provide resources for parents and coaches on the subject of youth sports. And the podcast has just been more or less an extension of that, of, hey, how do we make this a public conversation? How do we get people involved and really have people take notice of this great tool that is available? And so we started out doing some Instagram Live. Then as we gained some traction and some a comfort level with talking, really more for me of being in a formal type of setting, we got it on the podcast. And yeah, this is really our first year of getting on the podcast.
I got to say, Jason, as a diehard Cardinals fan, and I played baseball growing up, my boys play, I've got a boy playing junior college. How geeked out are you one day Trevor Rosenthal was like commenting on your X post or whatever it was? I would have flipped out, like, oh my God.
Well, first of all, I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody had a fake profile. And I was like, no way. Like, this is not who I think it is. Like, there's no way. So so it's fine. I was like, all right, hey man, like, thanks for reaching out. Appreciate it. Here's a Zoom link. And, by the time I was like, if it works out, cool, all good. If not, I was like, some person up there is just going to like, this is a joke. Right. And then it was like, oh, it's really him. Like, holy cow. Like, I did not expect that at all. And it's funny too, because like why wouldn't I expect it to be something great, right? I think so many times we are in this fear mentality of like thinking worst case scenario, thinking like, but I've really tried to train myself of like something happy and expect it's going to happen today. Like I'm really trying to like project the future, because faith and fear are get you to believe in some of the things that haven't happened yet, whether it's a religious aspect or not, or spiritual aspect or not. Like what I'm trying to do is like, okay, I'll write down in my, like when my day starts, I'm like, okay, today I'm going to have a really great conversation with somebody. I'm going to really connect with my kids. And it's things that really matter to me, right? And things that I'm going to have a breakthrough moment today, whatever it is. And it could be as simple as getting my kid to bed on time. That could be my breakthrough moment, right? But I think if we kind of switched out of that fear mentality and be like, hey, look, I know things are going to happen in life, but I believe that good things are going to happen to me every single day. And so it's really, focus on those belief systems. I think that was what meeting Trevor was, and building that friendship with him. I was like, man, like it's possible. Like, good things can happen to you if you're doing good things in the world.
So I think that's so big because Angie, when we met, she had that positive mindset where she was like planning things out and this is going to be positive things. And for me, when my dad died, that really was like when my glass house kind of broke at 27. I hadn't gone through a whole lot. Right before that, I had a marriage end unexpectedly. And so I go through some bad marriage time. My dad passed away unexpectedly and like my glass house breaks. And mentally, I wasn't prepared for that. And then I end up going through this extended period of just always thinking the worst. And Angie would probably tell you sometimes I still do. My kids would probably tell you that. Like it's a mindset that I haven't completely retrained, I guess. I haven't retrained myself to have that positive mindset. And I sure hope that my kids can do that a lot better than me going through this time where we've lost Hallie, their oldest sibling. And so with that being said, what are some of the things that you guys are teaching kids, whether that's individually through your church, or maybe it's with coaching kids or your own kids? What are some of those things look like? Some of the points that you think are most crucial to setting themselves up mentally for success?
For me, I think it's with my kids, it's not just getting them to think positively, but to feel it as well. Because I was the biggest positive thinker, but I didn't, in my core, I didn't necessarily believe it. Right. And so there was a disconnect for me a lot of times of like, I'm thinking one thing, but I'm believing a different thing because, and I'll share, like, whenever I found out my dad passed away, before that, they picked me up from school and riding home, I was thinking my dad was going to be okay. But in my heart, I knew like he had passed away. So like, that's where I think that disconnect went. So I went a long time of like, okay, it's more than just thinking. You have to garner some belief. And for us, it's like teaching kids core values. And what we have is a core value of gutsy. It's growth mindset, unity, thankfulness, servant leadership, and integrity. And so if you are doing these 5 things and you have a gutsy mentality, then you're going to start to believe that like if you fail, but you have a growth mindset, like, oh, that was just a lesson learned. It's going to help me get better to prepare me for what's next. If I have a group of people that I believe in, that's teamwork, we're going to be able to go farther. If I'm grateful for that, I'm going to be happier because of what I have. If I'm a servant leader, I'm going to go out there and be an example, and I'm going to do the right thing if I have integrity, and how I do anything is how I do everything, right? So those are the key principles that I teach kids consistently on a daily basis, whether I'm coaching them, whether I'm teaching them, whether it's my own kids, to have a gutsy mentality and to like build those core values to help ingrain in them an identity of it's more about what you do than what you say too. So it's getting out there and having them be their best versions of themselves, and using sports as an outlet is kind of more of a fun way to do it too.
Yeah. And I guess to kind of follow that up with, kind of in my house and with my young kids, this is a conversation that my wife and I have had more frequently because our kids are kind of getting out of that stage of just changing diapers and making sure that they're fed. And now they're turning into little people, and we're on the track to have more of those in-depth conversations and kind of like training tools. But for right now, and this is a topic that I bring up consistently on our show, is just talking to the parents, specifically talking to dads. There's so many times where a dad will come up to me and ask me for advice on how his 10, 11-year-old can be better at pitching. And my response is a lot of the times is, Well, what are you doing in the household first and foremost? How are you treating your wife? What type of example are you setting as a person? Are you creating a safe and comfortable space for your children to kind of figure out things on their own to begin with? And then, taking a step farther is you have to put yourself in the shoes of these kids. These kids are cognizant, and they are worried about performing to impress their parents and to get that recognition of being good enough. And so I like to take a step back. And again, like, this is a conversation my wife and I have of, we are in our mid 30s and we have lived life, and obviously we saw the effect that our parents' relationships had on us. And when we understand this opportunity that we have to make an impact on our kids' lives, and more than anything that we say or do, or the house that we live in, the cars that we drive, the things that I do for work, the things that my kids are probably going to remember the most is how I treated their mom. So that's a subject that I like to bring up and just remind people of what's ultimately really important.
That's awesome. I love that. That's such a great perspective, because I do see that a lot in sports. I'm not a huge sports person. So Aric talks about baseball all the time.
Different that way.
I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but okay. Hey.
Well, I like that. That's we were talking this week about, so there's a Cardinal Hall of Famer. He used to hang out in the clubhouse all the time. His name's Red Shandies. And for you, Angie, you're probably like, Red Shandies? And that's exactly the point. Like, this guy won multiple championships, was in the Cardinals organization for a long time. And we always would see him hanging out in the clubhouse. And it was almost like he would, have the same routine of get in the hot tub and then lay on the training table. And we're like, man, is Red still alive? Like, he hasn't moved in a while. So I'm going to go check on him. But that's exactly the point, is like, we're all going to have our day where we're no longer here. And more likely than not, just like Red Shandies, people probably aren't going to remember who that famous baseball player was.
Yeah. I think the thing that I see kids struggle with the most is fear of failure, and also the not being good enough. Like, I think that kids a lot of times are way harder on themselves than what their parents' expectations are of them. Or I see that with my kids for sure, of not wanting to fail, wanting to show up and not necessarily embracing it as an opportunity or taking on that struggle and turning it into something beautiful. It's like, I don't want to go out there and mess up. And so I struggle from a parenting lens of how do you get them to change that mindset? Because what's interesting, especially for my kiddos, because I'm not a huge sports person, I see all the sports as learning opportunities. That's the lens I look through. So it's where is this pressure coming from? I think part of it's social media, obviously, but it's very hard as a parent to try to get them to see it a different way when they are afraid of messing up.
And I think the key thing to do is separate what you do from who you are, right? And as I coach kids, I'm like, listen, if you're giving your very, very best, you're going to mess up. It's going to happen. That is fail forward. If you are, and I always tell kids, if you're giving your best effort, that's okay. If you miss a shot, if you make a bad pass, but if you had the right idea, everything starts in your mind first. And you got to remember, the kids, their body's changing every year. So the things that they were really good at last year, they might be terrible at because their arms are 2 inches longer, or they're taller or whatever. So they got to relearn their bodies every single year. So whenever you get to your 20s, then you can really start to hone in on this stuff because your body's pretty much done growing. And that's where I think kids got to learn, hey, give yourself some grace. Parents, give your kids grace, knowing that praising their effort, praising their teammate, praising their character, all of those kind of things are going to lead them to feel that pressure to mess up less. And especially if you can uplift them and man, I really loved watching you play. I know you fell short there, but wonder what we can do next time. What did you learn from that? Asking them questions about it at the right time. Sometimes at the moment they might just need a hug and just to walk to the car and not say anything. Maybe they distract them from it. But the next day or 2 days later, wow, that was so fun to watch. What were some of the things that you learned from that situation? And how can we get better for that? Right? How can we take that as a learning opportunity? Sometimes maybe the worst thing that happened to you could be the thing you needed to help you get to where you want to go in sports, in school, and whatever it may be. So helping them kind of shift that or reframe those moments, I think is really key.
I love that. I don't know that my kids would ever be like, hey, that's exactly how you handled that, Dad. I think they're listening going, hey, did you hear what Jason just said? Next time, either give me some space or approach it from what did you learn after the fact. And that's great. I mean, that's really good advice. I like that a lot. And I do want to just hinge for a second on what Angie said about social media. There's obviously it was, I think, initially intended to be a good thing, but there's obviously negative things. And so as you're coaching kids, Jason, what are you seeing that they're struggling with in social media? And Trevor, you've also seen it from being a player. I'm sure it's like, oh my God, Rosenthal blew the save tonight. I can't on X, right? I mean, it's so you guys are seeing it from different aspects of how social media can work. How do you coach kids with their social media? And the other part of that we didn't even talk about is like, I'm constantly, both of us, Angie and I, telling our kids, like, don't put things on social media that you can't take away because they're there. Once it's there, it's there. You can't remove that. So thoughts on social media as a whole, what you're seeing?
I mean, social media is a tool, right? So if you use it in a way that could maybe uplift a teammate, or if you use it in a way that maybe you're looking for different ways to get better in your specific spot, or like, you find people that are really influential in a positive way, it could be a positive thing. The one thing I would tell like everybody is, including myself, is like, you have to protect your mind. You have to, because it might be better for you to not have social media because of the way it will send you down a rabbit hole. And you're like 30 minutes later, like, what did I just do? Like, what happened? So at the same time, you can get a lot of really great ideas from it. But for younger kids, that's why sports can be such a great thing, is because if you have a phone and a ball's coming at you, you're going to get hit in the face. And you got to be aware, you got to be focused, and you got to communicate with people in person. You have to follow, a coach's guidance, right? You got to be mentored. You got to be all these things that sports can provide in a unique way are skill sets that kids are going to need, because, ironically, the things that we took for granted, the social skills, the things that we did whenever I was growing up, 80s and 90s, have to be intentionally taught because of the technology that's taking our kids away from each other. Like, did you all know that about 75% of teenagers in a survey said that they feel lonely on a regular basis? 75%. Like, that is an alarming rate that's going to turn into, like lonely adults. Like, lonely kids turn into lonely adults because they have a fear of being around people in person. And that's like an evolving issue. Like if we can't be around each other in person, how are we going to keep moving our species forward, too? So, Trevor, I'll let you continue on that from a player's perspective, but I think it's like, how do you get kids to really engage with it authentically, build connections beyond over the phones and technology?
Yeah, I think I would get reminded of a story when I was with the St. Louis Cardinals. So when I was coming up with the St. Louis Cardinals, I always wanted to be a starting pitcher in the major leagues and never really got that opportunity. I mean, I had a great role on the team. I was the closer, so I had an important job to do on our team. But I remember being in Kansas City, and during batting practice before the game, we were standing around the batting cage, and I was talking to one of my good friends. He was a hitting coach at the time, John Mabry, awesome guy, and played in the major leagues for a long time and has been a coach in the major league level for a long time. Had a great career. But I was telling him, I'm like, hey, man, I was like, I want to go to another team. I want to get the opportunity to start. I want to be a starting pitcher. I think another team would let me do that. I'm just not happy here with the St. Louis Cardinals and really feeling like I wasn't being treated fairly. And he looked at me and he told me, he's like, he's like, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And I thought when he said that, it really like hit me deep. Like, you need to pay attention to what he's saying right here. But I kind of brushed it off and thought, I don't know. I think I'm being treated unfairly, and I'll go somewhere else and I'll get the appreciation that I deserve, or the fairness that I deserve. And shortly after that, I was on another team, bounced around with a few other teams. And granted, I did, have success and a good experience in other situations. That same feeling was always there. And I think that's kind of the point that I'm making is, social media. I mean, we've always had the tendency to look at our neighbors and look at other people and think, oh, like they have it so much better, or I wish I had what they had, or things aren't going well for me. It seems to always work out for somebody else. There's always been this comparison. And I think social media puts that on steroids to some extent, where we can see other people's lives in real time every single day and start to feel a certain way about it. But for me, it's kind of going back to that conversation we were having earlier about fundamentals of just, if I'm fundamentally focused on myself, the things that I control, and doing the things today that are going to lead to good situations in the future, I mean, things will most likely work out. So that's kind of my view on social media.
I want to dive into just a couple like tasks that you guys do daily to build up a positive mindset. But before we get to that, I want to talk about a mindset trick that you were telling me about, Trevor, when we chatted in Columbia last month about a pitching coach you had in the minor leagues who's now he's won a World Series with other teams, not the Cardinals, Brent Strom. And when you were coming up, he would come up and mess with you intentionally to teach you how quickly you had to be able to change your mindset. And that conversation has stuck with me since we had it about a month ago, because I know that one thing can mess up my day and send me down a rabbit hole. I know I see it with my kids. And so can you just real quick, before we dive into some practices that you guys put into place, what he was doing, like one, how he did it to try to throw you off your game, and the reasoning behind his coaching mechanisms?
Yeah. I mean, there were so many different situations. I shared a funny story, and I can share that. But, for pitchers, we have this dedicated practice time called bullpens. Like you're throwing a bullpen. So you're not on the game mound, you're on the side, and you're doing pitching practice essentially. And I would always notice that he would intentionally interrupt me. He would interrupt all these other pitchers. And it didn't seem obvious, because he would be asking you a question about something related to baseball. And so you thought, okay, this guy is just an old guy that has no feel for social clues here. Like he's interrupting me at the wrong time always. And you're like, gosh, this guy's like annoying. Like, please stop doing that. And as I've gotten older and I look back on that time, like, no, he's a genius. Like he was purposefully taking me out of my focus during a practice session where the environment's controlled to simulate what's going to happen to me in a game. Or you can even relate it to life. There's going to be times in the game, in competition, or in life where distractions come in and take you away from what you would ultimately like to have all your attention and focus on. And by him doing that in practice, we were able to train ourselves without even knowing it of, okay, I can't think about this old guy that smells kind of funny and he's talking to me about something random. I need to focus, get my attention back to where it needs to be to get this job done that I need to get done. And I'm so thankful for that. And I'm glad that I've kind of had that realization at this point. And like you mentioned, Aric, I've applied that into other areas of my life, and specifically with the way I think. I've noticed, talking about tough times and going through challenges and things that don't go the way that we want them to, we can find ourselves just kind of just thinking about it. And our mind likes to remind us of where we messed up, or where we fell short, or what didn't go right. And it's much like in pitching in a game. It's like, I have to be in control of what I'm taking my focus to. And if I'm focusing on these things that aren't going to serve me well, I can't expect to have good results. So I need to focus on the things that ultimately I'm trying to achieve.
Okay, I wasn't going to have you tell the story that you told in Columbia last month, but now that you brought it up, I remember it's really hilarious. And even my wife, who knows nothing about baseball, will find this to be great. Jason, I'm sure he's told you this story, but if you don't mind telling the story about when you were pitching and you were starting, it was the minor leagues, and he comes out because, well, you were in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah. So this is so great. So yeah, I was early in my career, doing really well, and really the first time that I had started to struggle late in the game. And I knew at this point it was common for a pitching coach to call a timeout and come and talk to the player. So I look in the dugout. Sure enough, the pitching coach is coming up the steps, calls timeout. And while he's walking out to the mound, I'm thinking to myself, okay, thank goodness this guy, he's got a great track record. He's helped me a ton. He's probably going to give me something really valuable here that's going to help me get back on track and get out of this inning. So he comes out to the mound, and the catcher and the infielders are all there, and he kind of ignores everybody else and looks straight at me. And he's like, "Trevor, what the hell are you doing out here?" He's like, "You need to hurry up. I'm about to shit my pants in the dugout, and you need to get out of this inning." And he turns around, clenches his butt cheeks and walks back to the dugout. And we're all just on the mound watching him walk back to the dugout, thinking, what just happened? But that's the ultimate distraction, to the point of, okay, look, we got to get back into this game and not think about it. Exactly. And it worked. I got out of the inning. I don't even think he needed to use the bathroom, because he never went to the bathroom after that. He was in the dugout talking to me, but
that is awesome.
He's a genius in his own right, for sure.
Smelly. He smells funny, but he's a genius.
So the same guy?
Same guy.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
All right. So to know that mindset is so critical, and obviously you guys are already telling me that I've got to retrain my own mind, Jason, to have the positive thoughts and to really believe them. What are some one or a couple of daily practices that each of you do when it comes to focusing your mindset that I could use, my kids could use, anybody listening?
For me, the first thing I do, I wake up, I either move, like exercise, like some sort of physical movement, or I spend about, 15, 20 minutes of just quiet stillness and just like using my mind to imagine myself having a great day regardless of what happens. And I've learned a couple of tricks, like with my words too, of like, anytime something happens, I'll say, good thing, bad thing, not sure. Good thing, bad thing. I don't know. Like delay the label, right? We are so quick to label on if something is good or bad, where like sometimes, like, I don't know, maybe getting that flat tire wasn't the worst thing, because now I actually didn't get into a car wreck or something like, so my point is, delay the label on things. And then I read there's a book that I read consistently every day. It's called, Trevor and I have done a book study on it. It's called The Game of Life and How to Play It. And it just talks about how your words always matter. And I always say, I can do this. I got this. I can do this. I got this. And I just continually try to like rephrase things. Whenever I have a negative thought come in my head, or whenever I have something like the worst case scenario pop in my head, I'm like, okay, how do I reframe this? Okay, I got this. I can do this. Good thing, bad thing, not sure. Right. So I'm constantly like talking to myself, as opposed to listening to all like the crazy things that come into my mind too. Right. Because we have thousands of thoughts a day, and they're not always going to be the best thoughts. So how do you let them pass through like clouds in the sky and replace them as quick as possible? So those are the few things that I do.
Ange, what did you always say to the kids when we first met that they always hate? And I always thought it was so good. It's kind of like what Jason just said, whether you can or you can't.
Oh, if you think you can or you can't, you're right. I think it's a Henry Ford thing, but it's so true. It's like in your mind. Yeah, if you think you can't do it, you're right. You won't be able to do it. Yeah, they love it.
They're always like, oh, mom.
Trevor,
the psychology of it for you, man.
The psychology is so interesting. And the more you become kind of educated on the psychology of how we operate, it's easy to identify other people and their kind of internal language that they have to themselves, because most of the time it becomes external. And that's what Jason and I talk a lot about is, whatever's kind of going on the inside is ultimately going to determine your actions. So it's really important to be mindful of how you're thinking and what you're believing in yourself. But yeah, much like Jason, I've, tried, developed a stronger practice of reading and just educating myself on different areas. And I like to really be more intentional of my thoughts. I use a technique called a C technique. It's SEA, which stands for stop, evaluate, and then act with wisdom. So anytime I do have a negative thought, I like to first and foremost just kind of stop it at the very least. And I find most of the time that solves my problems. But then when I do have time, I like to take it a step further and evaluate, why am I thinking that way? And I've found a lot of the time my thoughts have really just been developed by behaviors or routines that I wasn't fully aware of. And those were influenced on me either by my parents or other environments that I was around. So the evaluation process has become important into better understanding what are the results that I desire and what are the ways that I can go about achieving those results. And that kind of leads into the last part of the equation is taking action. And I want my actions to be aligned ultimately with the goals that I desire. And so I think it's become very important. And this is something I wish I would have understood earlier in my career. I think it's something that is almost should be taught to kids at a very young age, and something I want to pass along to my kids, because I think we've all kind of been exposed to this idea that whatever we feel or wherever our body is kind of initiating us to go, we that's where we should go. And that's not always going to lead to the best results. I think we do have more control than we often realize.
Well, guys, tell us before we wrap today, where our listeners can find your podcast and all of your ways to follow you on social media and those different things.
Yeah, I mean, check out the Game Plan Show. We're on Spotify. You can find it on our 40 Leaders YouTube channel. On Instagram, I'm Jason.Holzer. And 4D Leaders is Leaders without the E is where we can find us. And we have a newsletter out for coaches too that we've started that just kind of gives people some practical things like coaches can do to work with kids. Our last newsletter featured a sports psychologist that was the former director of player development for the Toronto Raptors. So like has some really great psychological expert advice on, how to handle your mindset and how to build confidence in your kids, regardless of whether they're playing sports or school or just who they are as a person. So we're excited about the value that we're bringing to people who are involved in youth sports as a parent, as an athlete, and as a coach.
That's awesome. Well, guys, we're going to wrap with one thing that each of us are grateful for today. So I don't know where you're at with that, but who wants to go first? But we'll just take a turn before we say our goodbyes.
Trev, go ahead, man.
Yeah, I would say first, there's so many things to be thankful for, but in this season of life, I'm just thankful for God, thankful for his unwavering goodness. And through all the challenges that I've faced, things that have been far better and far worse than I could have ever imagined, he's always been consistent and provided a level of peace and comfort. And I know, there's a lot of hope for the future. There's so many good things to look forward to. So I'm thankful for his unwavering presence in my life.
Love it.
Yeah, I'm grateful for just my family that God's blessed me with, overcoming the challenges of losing my dad, but my wife, my two sons, my sisters and sister-in-laws and nieces and nephews. So really the people that are in my life, I'm very grateful for them because they're constantly encouraging me to be the best version of myself. So at the end of the day, that's what we're going to remember anyways. They're the people that you spend time with and did really cool things with. So that's what I'm grateful for.
I'll jump in next. Well, obviously grateful you guys are on our podcast. I totally have enjoyed this conversation. It's like in line with how my brain works. And I think our listeners will really appreciate it as well. But one thing that I'm grateful for, it seems very, very small, but this past weekend, I know it's super early, but I put up our Christmas trees in our house. But it's also a very big deal because holidays are always a hard season for people. I mean, I think we always think about all the joy and the presents and Thanksgiving, the turkey and the food, all that stuff. But it's hard for a lot of people. And when we lost Hallie, we had her house decorated. She had presents under the tree, all the things. So the holidays are hard. And I made it through putting up our trees. I shed a few tears for sure. But I think it's also just a public service announcement for our listeners too. If you know someone that's grieving through the holidays, just send them a text. Just don't even have to ask any questions. Just let them know that you're thinking of them, because it can be isolating through the holidays because everybody's having this amazing time and you're like, ugh. So I'm grateful that we got the house decorated.
It looks good. I like your tree in the background.
Thank you. So I'm actually in our office, so we have multiple trees that we put up. But
it's
last
great.
night, our one of the twins, Angie's son Chase, who's getting ready. The twins are going to turn 16 in a couple of weeks, and he all of a sudden wanted a tree in his room. Well, we have several trees, so I had some in storage. And next I know, he found like another tree that we had in storage that I had forgotten we had. So now he's got a couple trees in his room. He's hanging lights. I'm like, we got a winter wonderland. We got a Clark W. Griswold situation happening down here in the bedroom. It's obnoxious.
I wonder where he got that from.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I would just say I am grateful. I was going to say this. I didn't know you were going to say you're grateful for the Christmas, but I was grateful that we put the Christmas up this weekend early. And really, Summer, Chase's twin sister, was really the catalyst behind that. And what she said, we were coming home from soccer this weekend in the St. Louis area, was, it brings like joy. And as we approach the 2-year angelversary of our daughter Hallie, it's been, there are times where it doesn't feel like there's a lot of joy, right? Like we trust that God's in control. and that he has a plan greater than ours, but sometimes that doesn't make it joyful. And so I was going to say, like, to see some of the Christmas go up, and I did see Angie shed some tears while we were doing that, but to get through it and for it to be up, and the kids last night, first full night, for them to be like, this is up. It looks good. I'm glad that we did it early compared to waiting closer to Thanksgiving. And again, just super grateful that you guys are a part of this show today, and that we met last month, Trevor, and that Jason's a hometown kid, and probably, and as we said before, because I probably listened to you on the radio. He probably has. If you listen to any kind of country music at all in mid-Missouri, then yes, you did throughout the year, or even gone to Mizzou basketball games, because I did a lot of Mizzou basketball games for a long time too. So it's pretty small. Everything, it's such a small world that we've come together, and hopefully help some families out today to get some more resources with helping kids and things like that. So guys, thank you very much for being a part of the show today.
Yeah. Thank you
for having us.
Yeah. Talking about Christmas decorations, you gave me a good reminder. I did a good job this year of not complaining about putting up Christmas decorations.
There you go.
Because my wife is very much the same as Angie. She loves Christmas time and the decorations. I'm like, oh man, we got to buy another tree. I got to get out all this stuff. Like, I'd rather just not.
Yeah, you suck it up and you like those decorations.
I didn't say one word. I need to keep that going, because I'm going to have to take it all down here in a couple of months.
Yeah. Like I told Angie, it comes down so much faster than it goes up. So yeah,
for sure.
Thank you for listening to Blended Blessed and Always a Mess. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at blendedblessedalwaysamess.com.
Reach out to us on any of our social channels. We would love to hear from you. Have a great week.